You're very welcome to this new project, Porteo Media. It's my new YouTube channel on which to share some interesting material that I have accumulated over time. Porteo Media is the kind of modern imprint of Porteo Marketing, which was my lucky charm in 1986 when I won a commission from Channel 4 television in the United Kingdom to produce an 8-part series. Now, I would have done a 20-part series if I'd had my way, but this was what I discovered. I had done a feasibility study for the Irish Export Board and the Irish Industrial Authority, looking into the feasibility and the viability of reasonably cheaply made, as it was thought then, material for documentary material for sale on the export market. And on, guess what, which was the new invention then, video, because in the 1980s, video was seen to be very cost effective, and it put the possibility of making film and TV programming the way of many people who could never have afforded to start doing it in a film process. What the feasibility study disclosed after my researches was that there was actually a glut of documentary material, and what there was a shortage of for some scheduling, and it was all to do with scheduling, was feature type, filler type material. And in this instance, I was very lucky in that Channel 4 in the United Kingdom had just come on stream. They were working on a commissioning basis, so they looked at the proposal, which was a quite involved and complicated stage of legal processes and submissions, and then on the basis if it went to a certain stage of the programming, it then was, they looked for a pilot, and then as a result of that, if they liked what they saw, you went to the next stage. And in my case, it was an 8-part series, so it was 8 half hours to fill a gap in their scheduling that suited. So easy viewing, reflective, nothing too heavy. And so we managed to pull that deal off in 1986. So Porteo Marketing was launched then, and under that umbrella we produced the 8-part series. And it's now this year 35 years since they were recorded. And it occurred to me that the material could be of interest to people who may have known the personalities involved or been aware of their careers and wondered about some of the revelations, really, about them, personal ones, that come out in this series. Now, I don't mean scandalous ones. You see, therein lies the difference between then and now. These are not kiss and tell or revolutionary things about somebody's lurid past, far from it. But nor is it famous people or successful people being given an opportunity, which most interview programs tend to do, of talking about their work or their latest work or their successes. The theme of this series, Generations, was to look at the influences of previous generations on the shaping of the lives and destinies of the people involved. And so as to the format, it's as if, I hoped would come across this way, as if I were just sitting in the foyer of a hotel, the lounge, talking to these people, and you were eavesdropping. It's an unscripted format. All of the guests were women, because the original series was to be 8 outstanding, successful women reviewing their background, their childhood influences, parents, grandparents, whatever it was that came to them, and they weren't pushed in a particular direction. And the remarkable thing about it is that all of these women who were either firsts in their field were at the pinnacle of their successes, and nobody even tried to talk about their current work, and all of them spoke for half an hour. So it was a very relaxed, easy format in which they were prepared to reflect on and talk about and describe some of their memories from their early formative years. I believe as was said in the one of the reviews of the first of the series that we're going to review, that of Siobhán McKenna, who was really the darling of the Irish theatre and film world. She was a leading actress in her time, and her famous St. Joan on Broadway just enwrapped people, and her success is really all laid out in the details that I have put below the programme, and I will do that in relation to all of the guests. So you'll have an opportunity of reading up. But who needs to do that? Because Mr. Google is there now, you can find out. Nevertheless, I have assembled the facts, and I'm putting those biographies, potted biogs, I should say, with the programme, so in the details you can see some of the background. But it's better just to hear their accounts, their memories, what they decided to talk about when they sat into the chair. And I didn't push that in any particular direction. And so, as one of the critics in relation to Siobhán McKenna from Punch magazine in the United Kingdom said in his critique of her piece, he said, in its way, a valuable piece of social history. And I think that's very relevant, because in the course of her discussion or her reflections, she talks about having met people from a previous generation who are very famous, and quotations from them are thrown out. And in many ways, the way she approached her career, the way her love of her parents kept her from going to America because she couldn't bear to be away from them for too long. She was in the Royal Shakespeare Company over in Stratford, and that was about as far as she could bear being away from them, so that she could get back regularly to visit them. Those differences in the way young people approach their careers, and even in respect of the story she tells about having to put it to her father that she wasn't going to follow an academic career, which was what his desire was, and she certainly had the ability to do that. But her mother saying to her, take him out for a walk, and her mother's almost complicity in the plot, knowing that she was going to be breaking it to her father, that she wasn't going to fulfill his dreams for her and his aspirations, or his considered view about where best she should go with all the talents that she had, but that she wanted to go into the arts and take him out for a walk, and she did. And I'm not going to preempt the story because she tells that very beautifully, but just suffice to say that you can see the differences in then and now very markedly, and how people, in some of the stories of the past, had to perhaps negotiate a little bit with parents to let them go away to train, or to get the necessary exposure, or to follow a certain chosen path. So I look forward to your views. I hope that you enjoy the series. I shall be saying as little as possible in the forwards, because I think it's important for you to get straight in to the actual speaking of the guest. 4 of the interviews were done in Dublin, and 4 were done in London, in the London Tara Hotel in Kensington. Now, I will be warning you, this was a very low budget production. It had to be, because I was fitting in to the requirements of the commissioner, who was looking for low budget feature type material to fill certain schedules. And so I hope that you'll forgive some of the production values that are not as good as they should be, or that they would be nowadays. And my goodness, people are used to much higher spec, even from homemade movies now. Such are the facilities and technologies available. But in those days, in order to have 2 cameras, the union manning levels would have involved having 2 full crew. I couldn't have afforded that. The result is we have 1 camera, 1 crew, and so we come in on what's known as a 2 shot, and then after that the shot is on the guest. And they're the subject after all. Why would it be anywhere else? But I was told by those who know that no, you can't do that, because people do get a bit frustrated if they're not every so often made aware of who's there and who's asking the questions. You can't be like a ghost. or a disembodied voice. So unfortunately, I gave in on that, and I think I gave in unnecessarily, and maybe to the detriment of the quality, because that involved, in some instances, my coming back after the interview was done and then sitting into the chair, and they're taking these blank shots of me either looking interested or even in some instances saying something. And in the business, I was told they were called the noddies. So not the most convincing. And you will at times see me looking very flushed, hot and bothered. And that was because the 4 in London, for budgetary reasons, were timed very tightly over 2 days. And so we had a suite made available by the hotel for us as our studio, full suite, so that all the technical people would be in one room, and one room was where the filming took place. And my room where I was staying was 2 floors up. So I would come down, we would be ready to meet and greet. I would meet the person in the foyer, bring them to our studio in the London Tower Hotel, and then when they left, the next person was due, so I would be refreshing everything, dashing up to get into different outfit, come down to greet that person and do the second interview. And then at the end of that, having seen them off in the foyer, the crew would say, okay, now can you go and do a couple of noddies for the first one? So I'd have to race up to my room and get the outfit I was wearing for that. And in some instances, maybe even, but the ironing board was out permanently, iron the top or whatever, and then belt down and sit into the chair and then go back up and do the same again. So there are explanations as to why it doesn't look as good as it does. And then in quality wise, I know it's a bad workman who blames his tools. I'm very conscious of that. But the reality is that this is the third degradation, if you like, degrading of an offline edit. So all I had originally, before I had to bring the big tapes, the master tapes, into over the Christmas of that year and worked on Boxing Day to get them edited, all I had were what they call offline edits on VHS, on a video. And then when time changed and modernity came in, we moved those onto a DVD and then latterly onto an MP4 file in order to make it available in this format. So it's come down a number of generations, hence the quality. So I do apologize for that. And someday, when the resources are there, I will take down the master tapes from my attic where they're being carefully stored, and I will perhaps have them put on directly onto a format that could go up on YouTube or other. So that's the plan. For the moment, I would just like to leave you by saying that the first in the series is very special because apart from her illustrious career, which was midway in 1986, Siobhán McKenna was only 63 years of age in the June of 86 when I interviewed her in the garden of her house in Rathgar in Dublin. And she just finished doing a very, very well received play by playwright Tom Murphy called Bólia Gangera, which is an extremely demanding part and under a lot of pressure to go on tour to Australia and beyond, and had said in her private discussion with me, which was a one-to-one meeting that we had for her to determine whether she was going to agree to participate in this, all arranged remotely by her manager. She said, you know, people don't realise when they talk about you being offered to go on tour, how wonderful that is, and it is, but it's a year out of your life. And we were in the double drawing room of her, the front of the double drawing room of her house in Rathgar, and there were some toys over in the fireplace, and as she was seeing me out, I noticed them, and she just looked in the direction of the toys, and she said, you know, I have 2 little grandchildren, and I don't want to miss a year of their lives. And the sad part of this is that from that June to November were the last months that Siobhán McKenna lived. She passed away in the November of that year, most unexpectedly. And it was a great shock to everybody because her she had not fulfilled all of the many talents that she had yet to display. So a life well lived, but taken abruptly. So it was in many ways poignant, and I'm very glad that we have this material as part of her archive, and it's my intention to make this video available to her archive, which has now been, as in from 2019, has been permanently lodged in Galway University. And you'll see from the way she talks about that university, the interesting part it played in the chronology of her father's career as a professor of maths, physics, and her career as well. So I hope you enjoy it. And I look forward to introducing the other guests in generations.
Did your mother always sit at the top of the table?
Yes, she did. Now, that is not to be interpreted that she regarded herself as the head of the household. As a matter of fact, my father was very much the head of the household. It was really accidental that the sideboard was at the back, and my father, being really an extraordinarily absent-minded professor, except about his work, he was quite hopeless about everything in the house, and my mother did all the serving. And
did your parents encourage you as a child to work hard?
Oh yes, my father was a great disciplinarian about, I mean, we had great fun, but about study, he was really a great teacher of everyone. And I was absolutely wonderful at algebra at the age of 5. But of course he forgot to teach me my sums. It was my mother who had to teach me. I still had like that, but I got full marks in algebra in inter and leaving cert, and got scholarship to university. A great deal through his teaching. He really wanted me to be a mathematician. And I was very good at maths, and I really loved it. And it really hasn't gone astray on me, because it does give you a logical mind, and it has a lot to do with imagination. I mean, in the Middle Ages, musicians and mathematicians were synonymous. Yes, one had to be in at 6 o'clock, and that was it. And but it wasn't just mathematics. He was a great devotee of the Irish language, and we always had someone in the house, and that was the language we spoke at table. My mother learnt Irish. We were very mean. We used to laugh at her pronunciation, which was not fair. We used to say she spoke with a swanky accent, but there was nothing you could say that she didn't understand, and she went to the Gaeltacht. We spent holidays in Ishmael and Carrow, but you see, I loved the language because it wasn't, we didn't study it. It was just the language of play and life. And Maureen Gilliwartin was, she was with us for 14 years, a marvellous girl. And my father, I remember saying that in any other country she would be a professor. She had the most deep knowledge of her own language. Again, she only went to the national school, but he was always looking out for people with ability and helping them. I was born in Belfast, where my father was teaching at Queen's and also at the Tech, and studying for an honours degree in pure maths at London University. And he sent for Siobhán McKenna, a girl from Ballyferriter, and to come up and help my mother in the house, and also to make sure that I would be a native Irish speaker born in Belfast, you see. That was a great ambition of his, you see, that a native Irish speaker could be born in Belfast. So Siobhán arrived, and my mother always told this story with great amusement and affection, but with great love, because my father was that kind of man, Siobhán arrived. My father decided she had brains. He taught her Latin, French, English and mathematics. And that was the end of Siobhán looking after this little Siobhán. It was my mother then looked after both Siobháns, and she said, I ended up polishing Siobhán's shoes. But she didn't mind. He would lock her up in the parlour and the little sitting room in Clonard Gardens, where we had moved from St James's Park, and she got her matric and she got a scholarship to Galway University. So I'm sure my mother remembered her own days, you know, that she could have done that if somebody had the imagination to take her up. But at college, I did mathematics and maths physics in the first year, as well as arts, and that was a very difficult thing. I was doing 7 subjects. It was a killer, really, and I was the only girl in his class, which was very embarrassing. And I did honours, and he used to put me in the front row, which made matters worse. And we had this dog, Kerry Blue, called Roisin Dove, and she also came to lectures. And she had a great sense of time, because when the hour was up, my father had no sense of time, but Roisin knew when the hour was up, and she would go down to the door and start to bark. And of course this delighted the boys, and they would start to whistle, and I was very embarrassed that I had such a strange father who would lecture on, you know, after the hour, and that only the dog would keep him in check.
Did he have very set ideas about what he wanted you to do with your life?
Yes, he wanted me to be a mathematician. He thought I could be. I was very good, but I wasn't as good as he thought. I think it was his teaching, really.
Was he disappointed when you...
He was very disappointed. He said, well, look, let's see, you know, how you do in everything. And I did well in... That sounds like... But I did the same. I did well in maths and maths physics. And the night I told him that I was going to go on with arts, my mother said, oh, bring him out for a walk, bring him out for a walk to Salt Hill before you tell him. And we walked, and we got to Galway Bay, and it was just as beautiful as it's described. The moon was shining, and I think he knew something was up, and we were both very silent. We were looking out, and he said in Irish, "Nach bhfuil sé sin go hálainn." And then I said I wanted to tell him something. And I said, I think I've discovered that I prefer words to figures. And we walked home, I think in silence, and when we came in, he went over to his old bookcase and he took down a book of calculus and he opened it. And I think I'd said something about the form of poetry and things like that, and he opened this book, and it was terribly moving. He said, but look, to me that is, look at the form there, and he said it has to do with imagination and poetry and beauty. It was extraordinarily moving that he should, because people do think about mathematics as something very dry, and to him it was a very imaginative world.
What was his reaction when you expressed your interest in becoming an actress?
Oh, total dismay. That was really the end. When I was at St. Louis in Monaghan, I did an operetta, and Mother Columbanus invited them to come up to see me. It was the geisha. I was playing Winky Wom, I think was his name, and the Chinaman. And she was very impressed, because the bishop's name in Monaghan at the time was McKenna. I don't think it was any relation. He wasn't a close relation. And he had requested 3 free days. He was so thrilled with this other McKenna who had played Winky Wom. My mother and father came up, and I remember I was about 16 at the time, and Mr. Cranfield had come to put the finishing touches on the production. Mother Frances directed the music and everything. I couldn't really sing, but I was funny, seemingly, and he met my father, and he was saying how wonderful I was. My father was all smiles and taking all the compliments, and then he said, you know, she would make a grand little comedian for the Abbey Theatre. She should just go straight there now. And the expression of my father's face totally changed. I mean, it was absolutely beaming with delight about his daughter being praised, and then suddenly to be a professional actor, he went absolutely like that. And then it was his fault, really, because of his great interest in the Irish language, because he encouraged me to not join the drama society at the university, but he encouraged me to join the Taibhdearc, which was the Irish-speaking theatre in Galway, and Wally Mackin was there at the time. And he was very fond of the theatre. He often talked about he went to the Abbey Theatre when he was a student in Dublin every Saturday night, whether they changed the play or not. So they were both great theatre goers. And I was allowed to go to see all the plays by Anya McMaster and any touring company that came.
Why would he be apprehensive about it as a career?
Well, when I came up to Dublin, I certainly didn't tell them I had anything to do with the theatre. I told them I was a student. You may not be able to believe that, but I think people were very apprehensive about the theatre at the time. And also my father really thought he wanted me to be an academic. And but it was this love of his for the Irish language. He forgot that in the Taibhdearc you did more than the Irish language, and that there were people. It was really my French professor, of course, who encouraged me, and who was determined, in actual fact, that I become an actress, Liam O'Brien. And he translated a play, I remember, when I was at college, and he had written to the Abbey saying that he had written it with me in mind. And I said to Liam, well, you know, my father was disappointed by not going on with maths. What's going to happen? I mean, will I still get first-class honours in French? And Liam said, well, he said, there's so much reading to be done. He said, you'll get second-class honours easily, you know. But and I said, well, how long will it take? And he said, 6 weeks. So I thought about it, and I thought, no. So I turned it down because I knew it would really have broken my father's heart. And I did 3 majors, which, as you know, is killing. I mean, the reading alone. But I did them, and I remember my mother being very, very worried, because she would get up and see the light still under my door, and I'd be studying until 3 in the morning. And in my final year, I did give up the acting then for the last term, much to Wally Mackin's disgust, and was studying very hard. And I understand very much the young people today having nervous breakdowns, because there wasn't the pressure then that there is now. But even then, I had taken on so much that I remember suddenly bursting into tears. I think my mother and I were saying our night prayers together, and I suddenly began to weep. And she, my father was away somewhere, and she bundled me off to Carrow for the day. But of course, this friend of hers left me behind, and she did that on purpose so that I just couldn't get at my books. But she had put a few Irish books in for me, and that really saved my life, because there's something about Gaeltacht people. They are so down to earth, and instead of studying, I went out to Cayley's and roasted mackerel at 6 in the morning and did things like that, and came back and my mind was clear again.
Was your mother more concerned about your welfare than your studies?
Oh, much more so. She felt that health was the most important thing.
Really? Did she talk about the past?
She did. I remember asking my mother how she met my father, because they, in some ways, they were very very alike and very dissimilar. and she was in Fermoy, she was the buyer there, and he was a teacher teaching school. And it just happened that they were staying in the same house. And Fermoy was a garrison town, and my mother knew a lot of well-off people who used to invite her out and invite her to balls, I think they were called at the time. So my father asked her out for a walk, and she declined. And I said, why? And she said, well, I was older than your father. And I said, I know, but this was always a joke at meal time. My father would say, Greta, what age are you now? And she'd say, no, Owen. A lady never talks about her age. And he would say, Anna, come on. And we thought, well, she must be a few months older than him. And it was quite a joke, until eventually she said, well, no, I was, you see, older than your father, and I didn't really like to walk out with somebody younger than myself. But eventually he asked if he could accompany her to one of these dances, and he couldn't dance, so at that time you marked your card or something, so her card was full in no time, and he just sat and watched her dancing and then took her home. And eventually he proposed, and she turned him down, and he got into a terrible state and threatened to become a monk. And I think then the local priest said, look, he's a very good man. And my mother said, but look, I'm younger than him. And he said, oh, don't be ridiculous. It was only when my mother died that my father said to me, what am I going to do about your mother's coffin? And I said, well, what about it? And he said, I don't think Greta would like the people of Galway to know her age. And I said, well, don't put her age. And he said, well, you know, you do put the date of birth, and then... and it was only then I found out that... I said, but who cares about that? It's just a few months. And he said, no, Greta was 10 years older than me.
My goodness. And you never knew that?
No, never. We thought she was a few months older.
Did she talk a lot about her love for him?
I don't think they talked about things like that. It was evident that they loved each other very much.
And did that impress you as a child?
Oh yes, well, one took it very much for granted, because it always gave me such an extraordinary sense of security that they were always there. And although my mother had a very extraordinary career for those days, actually I think she was earning at least 4 or 5 times more than my father when she married him. But it never entered her head to continue with a career. And she never regretted it. Which I suppose that wasn't unusual in those days. Women, when they married, and that was her entire life. Looking for my father's studs. I mean, he just left everything everywhere, and she had this extraordinary genius of knowing exactly, even mathematical books that, maths, physics, that she wouldn't really have understood. She always knew where to find things. It was amazing.
Did she involve you in that as a child?
We all had to look after my father. He really hated wearing a dress suit, and he refused, and I really admired him for that. He would wear a dark suit, but some dinner that he had to go to, and I always remember we were up in the old drawing room, which was a room that my mother made very beautiful. It had a window at either end with, I remember, snuff brown curtains on great wooden poles, and it had a big green Connemara marble fireplace. And to dress my father for this dinner at the university and get these studs in, and he was fit to be tied. He really felt it was ridiculous dressing up in what we all call monkey suits, and we told him he looked beautiful and everything. And he didn't drink very much, but I think my mother had to give a whiskey to sort of quieten him down, to get him at peace with this awful suit. But my grandmother, I remember asking her, because she had so many in family, she had about 9 children. I said, "You must have loved Eugene very much." And she looked at me and she said, "He loved me very much." And I thought that was reminiscent of something that Madame Gone MacBride said to me many years later when I met her. I just played the Countess Kathleen, and I just met her for the first time, and she'd asked me to come and visit her. And I knew about Yeats, but I didn't know the full story, and I said, "Madam, you must have been very much in love with Yeats." And she said, "No, he was very much in love with me." But I do think my grandmother was very much in love with my grandfather.
Talking about beauty, did you admire your mother and father physically?
I thought my mother was very beautiful and my father very attractive. He was like a teddy bear. I thought my mother was very, very beautiful, and she was, because many people said that they remembered her when she was a young woman that my sister resembles her. She had dark auburn hair and grey, wonderful grey eyes, and it's a colour eye that I really love. It's very unusual. Eyes are either blue or green or something, but hers were absolutely
Did you
grey.
express your admiration for her? Did you talk about that?
Oh yes, actually I was so fond of my mother that I hated to go for holidays anywhere else. If girlfriends asked me, I hated when I came to the Abbey. I would always, first the moment we'd get the holidays, I'd be off. People might find it difficult to believe this, but I thought, well, I just couldn't see my father and mother on weekends or for Christmas. Well, maybe for Christmas, but it would be just holidays, and I couldn't just blow down to Galway when I wanted to see them. And in actual fact, although I worked quite a lot in London in those days, because it was near to home, I didn't actually go to America. The first time I went to America, my mother had died, and that was the first time I went. In '56, she had died the year before. And
How did you cope with that wrench then?
well, when I heard that she was ill, I was in Stratford-upon-Avon in England, and I was under contract for the whole year. And I remember my father ringing up. I knew she was ill, but I didn't realize how ill she was. It was cancer. And my father must have been really upset, because he rang me during the show, and he must have insisted, because the stage door man, who was very fond of me, actually came to the side of the stage, and I was playing Celia in As You Liked, which is a very jolly part, and she laughs a great deal. And he told me, and I remember just bursting into tears. And we were talking earlier on about mind over matter, and how does an actor, get over these things. Well, I did, break down into tears, and the stage director, who was a girl, also very fond of me, smacked me on the face, and she said, "Go on." And I shook my head and went on, and laughed at Celia and all this, and had no memory of anything until I came off, and I had to ring my father, and he was really very, very broken on the phone. So I went to Glenbyamshaw and I said, "I'm going home, I have to go home." And he said, "But my darling, you can't, you're under contract." And I said, "But I'm going home, I'm going to break my contract." And he said, "But my darling, you can't do these things in the theatre." So then he was very good. He realised I'd have to get home for a few days, and he let me go home for a few days. And I thought that season would never end, and as soon as it ended, I went home and stayed with her. But it's a strange thing to say. Her room became the club, it was the happiest room in the house. Everybody would bypass the old dining room where we used to always meet with that table where she always sat at the head, past the drawing room and upstairs to her room, which had a big fireplace. It had that great advantage, that old house. It must have been very hard to look after, but it became the club. Everyone went up and sat with her, and she died on Christmas Eve. And although we knew one never really believes it, and she kept saying on Christmas Eve, "Has Nansheen got here yet?" That was my sister Nancy, who's a dentist in Dublin, and she kept saying, "Has she come yet?" Eventually Nancy, I think there was some kind of a strike or snow or something, but eventually she got a lift with some friend in a car, and she arrived. My sister had this terrible habit of telling her fortune with the cards. I mean, she would tell her fortune about 10 times, you see, until she'd get one she liked, I suppose. And my mother knew this, and just shortly before she died, she called me over, and I sat, and she sort of did that, pointing at Nancy, and started to laugh. You know, it was amazing.
She knew she had come.
She had come, yes. And that here was Nancy, quite unaware that she was off and that she had waited until she arrived, and here she was telling her fortune. You know, she had an extraordinary sense of, I suppose she knew she was dying, I'm not quite sure.